The 0-1 pitch. A liner off Nagy's glove into center field. The Florida Marlins have won the World Series.
What you just saw there was the Florida Marlins, an expansion team of just 4 years, win the World Series, becoming the quickest expansion team to win a title. Now, if you know the Florida Marlins, or at least now they're called the Miami Marlins, their history is a little complicated because they're a team that has seen kind of a lot of success, but also hasn't seen much at the same time. I mean, we're talking about a team that's been around for 31 years and has only been to the playoffs 4 times, but yet they have also won 2 World Series titles without winning their division. They're just a weird team, and in 1997 we kind of thought that maybe the Marlins were this next up-and-coming young team. They just won the World Series, they got immense talent on this team, so why couldn't they do it again? Well, let's just say ownership kind of tore everything down, as something that has become synonymous with the Marlins is right when they have their success, the ownership just doesn't give extensions out to their best players, or they end up trading them away. Might I remind you that just under a decade ago, the Marlins had one of the best outfields ever with Christian Yelich, Marcell Ozuna, and Juan Carlos Stanton, and within a 2-year period, they were all traded away to different teams, leading those Marlins teams that have success to kind of falter the next year. Not necessarily be terrible, but just kind of, you know, fall back to earth a little bit. But in 1998, this was more than just the team had a World Series hangover. They had a hangover and fell into a coma and seemingly couldn't wake up from it until they magically won the World Series again in 2003.
Trying to win it all again. Posada, slow roller right side. Beckett picks it up, tags Posada, and the Florida Marlins are world champions.
Because the 1998 Florida Marlins may have had the worst title defense, not just in baseball, but in any sport in general. As when you have a team that is coming off a World Series win, even if key players leave, you never expect them to be the worst team in the league, but lo and behold, the Florida Marlins, the defending World Series champions, lost 108 games.
Halfway.
Now, this would be the first of 3 times the Marlins would even lose 100 in their history, but at least the other 2 times they lost 100 games, it made sense because they were rebuilding. But in 1998, even though the Florida Marlins definitely switched up the roster, they definitely weren't seen as one of the worst teams in the league, just maybe a team that was retooling. Wayne Huizenga was their owner, and at this point in time, he was not happy because, well, let's just say he wanted the Marlins to have their own stadium being built. That way they didn't have to share it with the local football team, the Miami Dolphins, and nothing was approved for a stadium to be built. So, out of spite, he said, alright, that World Series we got with all these good players on it, boom, kiss them bye-bye. Even Gary Sheffield, who started the season on the 98 Marlins, would later be traded to the Dodgers in that season and would basically go on to still be pretty good after that. They also had a pretty solid manager in Jim Leyland, who was entering his 2nd year with the team. I mean, they hired him in 1997 because he was famously known for turning around the Pirates in the early 90s, and with Leyland, he finally got his World Series title. But when Wayne Huizenga started to, I guess, you know, just control the team without, you know, any of Leyland's consent, Jim Leyland got pissed off, and he would kind of ride through this season, but by the end of it, he was fed up, and he would, you know, leave. And to this day, this is the most losses by a World Series team who just won the World Series the year before. This is basically the opposite of what happened to the Baltimore Orioles, where just a couple years ago, they were losers. They lost 100+ games, they weren't going anywhere, but then all of a sudden, 2 years after they lose 100 games, they're winning 100 games and winning their division. This is the complete flip-flop opposite, where yes, the Marlins didn't win 100 games during their World Series year, they won 92, but they went from world champs to the absolute worst in the league, and it really wasn't even close. as the Marlins were the only team to lose over 100 games in the whole entire league, and they even had a worse record than the two expansion teams, the Arizona Diamondbacks, who lost 97 games, and the Tampa Bay Rays, who lost 99. That should show you how embarrassing this was, that the team that won the World Series before couldn't win more games than two expansion teams just getting started. All in all, the Marlins were kind of hoping this would be a one-and-done thing. They weren't going to cheap out. Hazenga was just pissed off, and I mean, hey, in 2003, they magically won the World Series again with some really good talent like Derek Lee, Mike Lowell. They had a young Josh Beckett and Miguel Cabrera on that team. But lo and behold, in 2004, to defend their title, it was time to trade some of those pieces away because the ownership didn't feel like they could afford to pay their players, which, if any baseball owner tells you that, you're lying. They have the money. It's just, do they want to dish it out and spend their own money to keep the good players, to keep the team good? And if the answer is no, then most likely they don't care at all. And it seems like no matter who the Marlins bring in, they just don't seem to care. It's the same result. They might have one good year, and then by the next year, they're one of the worst teams in the league. Because of the current 30 teams in the MLB, they're also the only team that has never made the playoffs in back-to-back seasons. All of them have come within a certain time period, and even after they won the World Series in 2003, they wouldn't make the playoffs again until 2020 in the COVID-shortened season, and they wouldn't make the playoffs again in a full 162-game season until 2023 when they won 84 games and barely snuck into the playoffs and didn't even win a playoff game. So I guess what this shows you is, if you're a team that has a lot of players in their prime, and you go on to win the World Series, or you have a window to win a championship, you don't necessarily have to lock down all those good players, but find the ones you want to build around, lock them up for the future into their primes, and then build around them as the years go on. The Atlanta Braves were one of the teams that are doing it now. I mean, they've locked up, Austin Riley, Ozzie Albies, Michael Harris, Matt Olson, Ronald Acuna Jr., while they're all in their prime, and each year they continue to build around them because they know this is the core of the team and we can still make it better, but at the same point in time, that means we don't have a lot of holes to fill heading into the season. A lot of it is just depth that you can bring in that can make your team even better than it already is. So maybe more teams should learn from the Atlanta Braves, and now you look at it, there are a lot of teams that are starting to lock up their young stars, like the Royals just did it with Bobby Witt Jr., knowing that he's the one they got to build around, and I'm hoping sooner or later, because I'm an Orioles fan, now that they are under new ownership, that they will lock up guys like Gunnar Henderson, Adley Rutschman, Jackson Holliday, and maybe with the way he's been playing as of making this video, Colton Cowser, to long extensions, so that way you can have them while they're in their prime, giving you that window of, okay, this is how long we have to compete, and, we hope to keep it going while these players are still here. But the Marlins, they just don't have that. They even had one of the best players in MLB history, at least in Yankee history, and Derek Jeter run the team for a while, and outside of the playoff appearance in 2020, he didn't really do a lot other than piss the fans off because he had good players that he would trade away for prospects that he thought would turn out to be something, and for the most part, 99% of them ended up not amounting to anything. Yeah, the Marlins just couldn't really do anything right for a while, and even in 2006, yeah, they went 78 and 84, but they had a team of some of the best rookies that you have ever seen. I think they had 9 rookies finish in top 15 for Rookie of the Year that year, and yet they never built around that core. And they still had Miguel Cabrera, and they would trade him at the end of the season to the Detroit Tigers because they didn't want to pay the superstar what he deserves. So the Marlins just don't know how to make things work, and even when they did get their new stadium and kind of relocated, they just went from the Florida Marlins to the Miami Marlins, and still the same. And even a GM who gave them some hope in Kim Ng, who helped lead them to the playoffs last year, they were going to demote her, and because they wanted to demote her, she obviously decided to leave because, hey, I just built this team that got to the playoffs, and you want to demote me? That just seems so, I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, it's because she's a woman, but it's just very fishy that she was doing well at her job and yet they wanted to demote her down, and now look at where the Marlins are. They're off to a pretty bad start, which, when you look at the records that they started through the first 16 games in 1998 and this year, they're fairly similar. So Marlins fans, prepare for a long and grueling year, not that you aren't used to it already. That's it for me. Marlins fans, I'd really like to hear what you have to say about that window there from 97 to 98 where you went, "We're world champions," to, "Oh my god, we're the worst team in the league," because I was not born when the Marlins won their first World Series. I was actually born the year they defended the title by losing 108 games, so I couldn't necessarily tell you what it was like. All I know is when you look at it, there has never been a team that has won the World Series and has had a worse year the next year than this team. And there's just a lot around it that most people, don't realize. It wasn't because the Marlins were a fluke. It's just because they got rid of everybody and their owner was a whiny little brat and put them in that situation. So that's it for me. Stay safe out there, and I will catch you all in the next one.